As another year winds to a close and another new year is almost upon us, it is that time when people start to think about ways that they can change or better themselves in the new year. And one of the more common things that you hear is people wanting to read more. Now, I know this all too well because that was me about a year ago. And it can feel daunting as an adult to try to figure out where in your busy life you can find time for this habit that we all know is really good for us. So, having been through that process myself, I wanted to tell you a little bit about where I was a year ago, where I am now, and then give you some tips and tricks to try to help you read more during your day to day life. Now, I was a big time reader as a kid. I used to read a ton, and the first book that I remember reading and loving was none other than, like a lot of people, The Hobbit. And of course, I read The Hobbit and then I wanted to get into Lord of the Rings. I started reading Lord of the Rings, got huge into that. And that led me down this journey of kind of fantasy reading, which eventually turned into reading all sorts of other stuff. Namely, I got really into horror books after that. So starting with all the R.L. Stine stuff, Goosebumps and Fear Street, and then eventually working my way up to Stephen King. And this love of reading continued pretty much through high school into college. Now, high school and college, it slowed down a little bit because I had other stuff that I had to read for school, but I was still reading a lot for pleasure through those times. Now, after college, I went to medical school, and then I got married during medical school, went to medical residency, had kids, and got this busy adult job, and a couple of different things happened. Number one is I found myself constantly saying that I was just too busy to read, or I just didn't have the bandwidth for it, or I didn't have the mental capacity for it, and that I worked so hard in my day-to-day job that at the end of the day, my brain just needed a rest, and I just couldn't handle reading at that point. The other thing that I found is whenever I tried to talk to any other adults about reading, I got a lot of kind of snickers about like, well, you're reading like horror and you're reading fantasy and that kind of thing. It's like, you're an adult, you're a doctor. Don't you think you should be reading something a little bit more serious? And in college, I was very close to getting a second major in American history. And so I figured if everybody says so, fantasy is for kids, I shouldn't read all this fictional stuff. I'm going to dive headfirst into fiction. So when I did find the time to read, I found myself reading history, whether it was historical fiction or historical nonfiction. And I enjoyed reading it. I was interested in reading it, but it also didn't excite me the way that books did when I was younger. And I think that this is a common experience for a lot of adults. A lot of us feel like our lives are incredibly busy. A lot of us feel like we don't have the time, we don't have the mental energy at the end of the day to read a book. Or we've been kind of told that the books that we really love to read aren't grown up, aren't adult enough, or whatever other excuses people make. And so it's a very common thing to get to that point where you feel like you just don't love reading anymore and it almost becomes a chore. So fast forward to about a year ago at this time in 2024, December, and I was thinking to myself, you know what? I want to read again. I was thinking about and talking to other friends who read a lot, who'd been trying to get me to read some fantasy books, in particular The Wheel of Time and the Silmarillion. And I just remember thinking, like, I really want to get back to that point where I just loved reading, but I don't know how to do it and I don't know where to start. And perhaps that may be where you are at this point. So the first thing and the first tip that I would give you in terms of figuring out how to read more or read again or read for the first time as an adult is number one, you have to figure out where you are spending your time and where you can find time to read. All of us feel like our lives are incredibly busy, and let's be honest, they are. But if you take a real assessment of your life and your day-to-day activities, you will find that there are definitely places and times where you can change what you're doing and insert reading into that time instead. Now, one of the things that I did, and one of the things I would highly recommend you do to figure this out, is to do what's called a time inventory. Now, you can look this up on Google, you can make your own, but basically, these are spreadsheets that have every day broken down into usually hour-long or half-hour periods. You can get bigger picture or more granular if you want to, but these spreadsheets just ask you to carry them around with you or keep them on your phone or whatever during the day. And just take note of what you're doing during those half-hour or hour blocks. You do it for a week or two, so you get kind of a nice average. And then at the end of all that time, you get to sit there, calculate it all, and figure out where you're actually spending your time. And even though I am an incredibly busy person with hobbies, with a full-time job, 2 kids, a wife, and all this other stuff, I was shocked at how much of my day was spent on my phone. I would basically spend 2 or 3 hours every night sitting in front of the television and simultaneously watching the television and scrolling through my phone, so kind of double screen timing myself. And I was just kind of blindsided by this, and I didn't realize how much time in my life was being dumped into this. And as a consequence, I was also staying up later and waking up later. And so I didn't have as much time in the morning. I had to rush to get ready. And then at nighttime, I was just sitting there kind of vegging out in front of this double screen setup. And your phone can track how much screen time you're doing, or you can download these apps that will do it. I wound up downloading this app called Opal, and it told me over the last year I had been averaging somewhere between 5 and 6 hours a day on my phone, with most of that being non productive time, not making calls, not text messaging or anything like that, just scrolling on apps that were not productive. So, was I a busy person? Am I a busy person? Absolutely. But did I have time in my day that I could dedicate to reading? 100% I did. And so that was step one, was just figuring out, where can I find the time to read? Now that you have figured out where you have time in your day to read, the next step is to figure out, what is that right first book to jump back into reading? And I encourage a little bit of thought with this, because I think what happens a lot of times is just like an exercise program, right? If you haven't worked out in years and you say, I want to work out again, and you go to the gym and you do a big, hard 2 hour full body lifting session, how do you feel 2 days later? You feel terrible. You've got bad muscle soreness. You can't move around very well, which means you don't work out later in that week. And then you've overdone yourself. You've overexerted yourself. You reinforce this like, I can't exercise. I don't enjoy it. And you're back in that cycle again. And the same thing can happen with reading. If we jump into a book that is farther along than we are ready for, it's going to set us up for failure. So I figured out that I wanted to wake up a little bit earlier, go to bed a little earlier, and read a little bit in the morning and read a little bit at night. And when I decided what I wanted to read, I decided that I wanted to go back to something familiar. And I would encourage you guys to do the same thing. Pick a book that you know that you love. Pick a book that you've already read, and pick one that is a little simpler, a little shorter. And that way you get some of that kind of instant gratification, and you're telling your brain again that reading is fun and that you really enjoy it. So for me, where did I go? I jumped right back into The Hobbit again. And this was a great way to restart my reading journey here. It's familiar territory. It's a story that I knew I loved. It's a story that I'd listened to on audiobook a couple times over the years again. And just again, something that I was very familiar with. Didn't take a lot of brain power, didn't take a lot of effort for me to want to read this book again. So I would encourage you guys to do the same thing. For that first book, maybe the first few books, pick something you're familiar with, pick something you love, or let's say you're not a reader, you didn't read a lot of books before, find something that excites you. Maybe it's the book version of a TV show or a movie that you loved, something that you wanted to read as a kid, but you never did for whatever reason. Pick something simple, and don't be afraid to kind of go down the young adult or like kids books even category. Just whatever you can do to get your brain to get back into reading. That's the whole goal here. Now that you've picked out a book and you know where you're going to go in terms of reading and what you're going to read, the next step is to make reading a habit. And again, kind of going back to that exercise analogy, little, small, incremental gains are always the way to go. And if we can establish patterns, we can build on those over time. So when you first start out, don't set crazy, overly ambitious goals like I'm going to read 2 hours a day. Your brain is just not ready for that. So take little steps, set a goal of I'm going to read a chapter a day or 15 minutes a day, just something where you're getting yourself back into that habit of reading again. And it's a thing that is going to build on itself, and you'll find you'll get better over time. And I say that because I found that as I started to reread The Hobbit, I noticed that I couldn't pay attention for very much longer than 15 minutes. And even though it's a book and a story that I know very well and I love, I was having some real just kind of attention struggles. And when you look into the research of it, this is one of the main things that you have to blame for the way that our attention spans are in our current society. There's a ton of research out there that shows that increased cell phone usage, increased social media time leads to decreased attention spans, decreased cognitive scores. And there was a recent study that just came out that looked at kids in particular in that kind of 10 to 14 year age range. Kids who had earlier or more extensive access to social media during that critical developmental time had much more increased issues with problem solving, with cognitive function, and with attention spans than their peers who did not have any access to social media and phones. And I know for some people, they may think, well, this is just kind of a common scapegoat, but it is totally true. These devices are designed to keep us on them. And a lot of the apps that we use, a lot of the social media stuff, it's designed to keep you scrolling, to keep you clicking, to keep you buying, and to keep you on the services, because that is how they make their money. And so you are going to find as you start reading that you can't focus for a super long time. And if that is the case for you, be okay with that and understand that at the start, you're only going to be able to read for a shorter amount of time, but then you need to build on that over time and start to force yourself. If only at the start you can do 15 minutes, well, the next week, try to push that to 20 and push that out little by little over time, and you will find that your brain retrains itself and you can recreate and remake and develop neural pathways in your brain to get you back into reading and focusing on reading again. And here's another tip that I have for you in terms of how to accomplish all this. When you go to read, you need to set up a reading space for yourself that is conducive to you not being distracted. So my wife and I had a room in our house that used to be like a kid's playroom. The kids are older, they don't play in here anymore. And so we set it up as a reading room. I built these shelves and made these built-ins, and we decided to make it a technology-free zone. The only tech that we have out here is a little Bluetooth speaker where we can play music. And when I first started getting back into reading last year, I would physically leave my phone in another room. I wouldn't even bring it in with me, because if that thing is within arm's reach of you, it's going to call to you and you're going to get distracted. We've all felt that feeling, whether it's while you're working or while you're driving. You just kind of feel something like, ooh, maybe I should check the weather app, or maybe I should see what that text message was. Oh, the phone just buzzed. I got to pick it up. And next thing you know, it's 15 minutes later and you're scrolling through YouTube Shorts. So set yourself up for success. Detach from the technology, keep it in another room, and just dedicate that time and space to just your reading. So now at this point, you've gotten through your first book, you've started to detach from that phone a little bit, and you're starting to build that habit of reading. Well, how do we keep that going, and how do we make that not just a new habit, but something that is a part of who we are and what we do? Well, the best way that I can say to do that is read what you want to read the way you want to read it. If you want to read audiobooks, if you want to read ebooks, if you want to rent books from the library, if you want to buy special editions, if you want to read romantasy, fantasy, manga, like graphic novels, comic books, whatever it is that you want to read, I don't care how old you are, I don't care what anybody else tells you that you should be doing. Do you and what you want to do, and that is going to help you be excited about this process and keep you coming back to it and make it a part of your life again. So if you've made it to this point in the video, obviously your goal is to read more this year, and I actually want to help you out with that beyond this video. So I'd highly encourage you to go to the description and check out the links for Bindery and for my Discord server. Bindery is a free book content app that is just focused on book content. And through Bindery and my Discord server, I am going to be running a reading challenge for the first 3 months of the year. And the idea of each month in that challenge is to help you get back into reading. So for January, we are just going to focus on those first few steps, talking about where your time is being spent, talking about your experiences trying to get back into reading. We've got a great community of people over there and on Discord who are going to be incredibly supportive. We'll have channels on the Discord just dedicated to you guys trying to get back into reading. So if that sounds like something that you want to do, please head over there, check it out, subscribe over to the Bindery, apply to join the Discord server. And on top of that, if you're maybe someone who's looking to bump your reading up a little bit, we are starting a book club starting in January. We're going to read The Lies of Locke Lamora, Project Hail Mary, and Malice for our first 3 months. So maybe you're already reading and you just want to get into something different and do a book club. We've got that for you too. So hopefully I'll see you over on Bindery or Discord to help you get back into reading this year. And then as you build up this habit and you read more and more of the stuff that you love, you can then start to insert little challenges, right? Going back to that weightlifting analogy, as we lift over time, we start to increase the weight a little bit and we start to put a little bit more strain on our muscles and put a little bit more tension on them. Well, let's do the same thing to our brain. So a couple months into reading, I decided, you know what? I've got this good habit now. And I have always wanted to read the Silmarillion. I love Tolkien, and I've always wanted to dive into this part of Middle-earth, but I never felt like it was something that I was necessarily going to be able to achieve, especially as I got older and had no attention span. Well, it turns out that this was one of the perfect things for me to read because This is a lot like a history book of Middle Earth. I had read a lot of history, but it's also fantasy, Tolkien, great storytelling. This was the perfect push a couple months in that made me realize, hey, you've made this a habit and you can do this and you can read whatever you want to read at this point. And as time has gone on this year, I've just started to push myself more and more and more. I read a couple trilogies. Eventually, I embarked on reading The Wheel of Time, which I'm about halfway through at this point, which if you're interested, I've got another video where I talk about that entire first half of that journey. But again, I've just been able to grow and grow, and I've been able to progress from the point where I had trouble keeping attention on reading for the first 15 minutes to the point where I can read for a couple hours in a row without taking a break and be fully immersed in that world. And it feels like I felt when I was a kid again. So even though it can feel like an incredibly daunting process, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed because there is a way that you can do this. You absolutely can get back into reading. And the last tip that I will give you is find a community, find other people, even if it's just other people in your house, trying to get your kids to read more, your spouse to read more, finding a book club that's local to you, but doing something that engages you in a community. Maybe it's my Discord server or my bindery, and finding people who are kind of like-minded and engaging with them to get you and keep you excited about books. So I'm interested to hear from you guys. If you are somebody who is looking to get back into reading, what do you think the hurdles are going to be? What have your struggles been like? Or if you're somebody who is an adult who reads a lot and who has gotten back into reading, how did you do it? What are some of your tips? Is there anything that I missed? Anything I got wrong? Let's talk about it down in the comments. Thanks as always for being here. Happy reading, and we'll see you on the next one.